Joy to the galaxy. Oh, I hear the dog. Rainy! Rainy, want to come in here? Rainy! Nope. Okay, no. Okay, so, a couple of weeks ago, whatever, month or so ago or whatever, when we got a whole bunch of stuff about Vegapunk revealed, and Vegapunk talked about the fact that, oh, well, you know, the ancient kingdom was actually this extremely highly advanced technologically, you know, way ahead of our time, type of a kingdom and everything like that, and that Egghead is like based off of that and everything. I did a comparison in the video where I talked about the fact that the Great Kingdom seems to be kind of an analog for, to a degree, like Atlantis, because a lot of the times in mythology about Atlantis and stuff like that, there were various concepts that, you know, the Atlanteans were very, very far ahead in regards to medicine and machinery and, you know, agriculture techniques and building techniques and all types of stuff like that. That the Atlanteans were way ahead of that. And which, I mean, you know, depending on, you know, what civilizations you're comparing other civilizations to, there are civilizations that exist on the same planet at the same time, or one is much more advanced in regards to technology than other ones are. Maybe not necessarily in the way of, like, technology, yes, more advanced, but maybe not necessarily in the way of, like, social standing and stuff like that. But it all depends from, like, one century to the next and everything like that. And, of course, empires, kingdoms, as any of them do, rise and fall, and sometimes rise again, and collapse upon themselves and stuff like that. And we've kind of seen a little bit of that kind of shown in One Piece occasionally. And we kind of can deduce at the moment that at the explanation for why the ancient kingdom is, of course, no longer around is, of course, because of, you know, huge war or something like that happened during the Void Century, and that resulted in, you know, the elimination of the Great Kingdom. Now, as you probably guessed by the title of this, I am going to be making comparisons between One Piece, Treasure Planet, and Atlantis: The Lost Empire. Yes, 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 Disney nerd here. Treasure Planet and Atlantis: The Lost Empire are both Disney movies. They both came out in the 2000s. And unfortunately, they're ones that don't get as good of a rep as they should, because those two movies are awesome and I love them. And one of the things that I wanted to point out, or some of the things that I wanted to point out, are similarities that happen between One Piece and then either both of them or one of the movies. Now, a caveat, of course, I'm going to go for the caveat. One Piece started in 1997, 25 years this year. Atlantis: The Lost Empire came out in 2001. And then Treasure Planet came out in 2003. And of course, Treasure Planet is based off of Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson, which came out in 1883. So, you know, the concept of Treasure Island has been around for a long time. There's even a Muppet movie version of it that I know I've seen at least once or twice, and it's really funny because I love the Muppets. It's Christmas time, so I still have to watch A Muppet Christmas Carol at some point because I love that movie. And so a lot of people have also thought of, like, well, is One Piece like influenced at all by Treasure Island? And admittedly, considering the fact that the concept of, you know, pirate adventures and stuff like that have been around for a very long time, for hundreds of years and stuff like that, well after the heyday of, like, you know, the pirates and Pirates of the Caribbean and different things like that, well after the heyday of those things, there's still a fair amount of that influence that can still seep into the culture. So that's not really surprising. A lot of people have stated that, like, well, there's not really a specific answer for whether or not Oda has read Treasure Island. There's the possibility that he's seen Treasure Planet and seen Atlantis: The Lost Empire, but then again, the concept of Atlantis, this ancient civilization that was lost beneath the waves, has been around for, you know, a couple thousand years at this point in time, if I remember correctly, and I'm probably going to get a few of my dates wrong in that regard, to when Atlantis was actually around. So there's a fair amount that goes on with that, but I was going to go through and make some comparisons here. And as I said, caveat, lots of these tropes that are in this are used in a lot of other types of stories, because my dad pointed out when I was talking to him about this a little bit, because my dad is one that I tend to watch a lot of Disney stuff with. Not that I don't watch it with my mom, but I tend to watch it with my dad a little more often. And he's the one that I went through and watched all of the Disney movies with. And if you want to have more of my opinions on Treasure Planet and Atlantis: The Lost Empire, go and watch those reviews that I did about them. And one of the things, one of the things that my dad pointed out was like, well, there's only so many different types of stories that can be told. Eventually, you're going to end up telling a story that has elements of other stories in it. And now there is a difference between plagiarism and copywriting and everything like that, and writing something that's inspired by something else. People write fan fiction all the time, and that's using the same characters that someone else made. And that's, it's like, as long as they're not necessarily making money specifically from it, there's not really a whole lot that can be done with that in regards to that, because it's a type of a parody. But then you get into the concept of like, oh, people write stories that are similar to One Piece, or other stories have been written that are similar to different anime and manga and comic books and everything like that. And yes, they put their own spin on it, because there's characters in both DC and Marvel that have very similar powers. Various strong men, or people that can shoot lasers out of their eyes, or a billionaire that builds a battle suit. Take your pick. Different things along those lines. It's like they have similarities. So the fact that these similarities are out there does not surprise me. The fact that this was done in 2 different Disney movies within about 5 years of each other, within the same decade, same half of a decade, is kind of more where I'm going with this. And that some of the things have lined up rather well with One Piece. Also, there are characters, just because I can mention this, there are characters in both DC and Marvel that are rubber, the way that Luffy is rubber. There's Mr. Fantastic, that is in Marvel. It is part of the Fantastic Four. And then there is, I believe he's Captain Plastic, who is in the DC universe. And he is, I haven't seen much about him, but he's very stretchy and has a very interesting sense of humor. So there's those characters. There's also other characters. There are cyborgs. There's the character Cyborg in DC that is, can be acquainted to Frankie to a degree. And a lot of these characters predated stuff that Oda did. So the fact that he came up with a character that stretches as his main character, while maybe a little bit more novel for a shonen manga, wasn't as new, I guess, in regards to Western media, because Western media had the Fantastic Four and Captain Plastic and Stretch Armstrong and rubber hose animation, however you want to go with that, in regards to what has also, been affecting Luffy lately. So going into this, things that I wanted to point out that are very similar between them. One of them all involve a young or a young-ish boy. With One Piece, it's Monkey D. Luffy. With Atlantis, it's Milo Thatch, and he's young-ish. And then you have, of course, in Treasure Planet, you have Jim Hawkins. And in the Disney version of the movie, in the animated version of the movie, they age him up a little bit. In the actual book for Treasure Island, I think he's actually, I don't even know if he's a teenager at that point in time, but he's in Atlantis. Ha ha ha. That'd be a good crossover. In Treasure Planet, he's actually supposed to be, I think, 15, 16 range. So there's the similarities there. They're all these young-ish boys. And then you have little to no family around them. With Luffy, of course, this is, he's, for all as we're aware at the moment, he's abandoned by Dragon. He's somewhat raised by Garp for the first several years of his life, and the village itself. And then, of course, before he only had Ace and Sabo. And then he only had Ace for a while. He had, Dawn and the others. But then we go into Atlantis, where Milo, his parents passed away. We never get an exact answer as to why, I don't think. But he is raised by his grandfather, Thaddeus Thatch, who he admires and adores. Luffy and Garp don't necessarily have an admirational relationship, considering that Garp is not the best grandfather. Although, admittedly, in one of the rough drafts, of course, for One Piece, there is, of course, a thing where Garp was a pirate and he was like kind of Luffy's inspiration for being a pirate. So there's a little bit more there. And then in Treasure Planet, we, of course, have Jim, who is, it's just him and his mom. His mom, Sarah, and that's what it was for a long time because his father wasn't around very much. And then his father just up and left and abandoned them one day when he was probably, preteen or going and being a teenager. And the dad just left, and we have not seen hide nor hair of him since. And which I know that in the book for Treasure Island, there's a little bit more of like where either Jim Hawkins is either straight up an orphan or it's just him and his mom, or it's like him and his aunt or something like that run the inn where he lives. So there's a little bit more of a give or take there. And then we move into Raised by Their Grandfather, which is where it's, Luffy and Milo are the answers to that. Luffy is, of course, raised by Garp. Milo is raised by his grandfather, by Thaddeus. So that's the similarity there between those. And then we go into this, this legendary captain and this treasure. And this is very much similar between, of course, One Piece and Treasure Island, or Treasure Planet, which of course based on Treasure Island, so there's all of that. And legendary pirates having treasure is not something new to any form of literature, even going back, an extremely far ways into history, even like before, like colonial times and stuff like that. There were other pirates that were around in different areas of the world, and they had treasure that they kept that they hid away, and as far as we're aware, has never been found. So yes, there's in of course with One Piece, it's Roger, and of course the One Piece that's on Laugh Tale. That's that legendary treasure that comes with that. And then of course with Treasure Planet, it's Captain Flint. And I like how in the movie they turned Flint into like an alien. Very scary looking alien. Whereas Roger doesn't necessarily, considering everything we know about him, Roger, unless you're having to directly fight him, doesn't necessarily seem like he's all that scary. He's like, oh, I want to go on an adventure and everything like that. That's what Roger is. Flint just seems scary. Flint just seems very scary. And then, of course, they have their treasures with Roger. Of course, he put everything on Laugh Tale and everything. It's his, it was his intention to, like, rile up the world and get people exploring and get them to go and find the One Piece and everything like that so they can find out the true history of the world and finish up his mission. With Flint, there were just stories about him that were passed down. And, I don't remember if we get an exact date for how long ago it would have been, but if you go into like Treasure Island, it's been, I would say, at least a couple of decades. I don't know if it's a full century, but then again, of course, with Treasure Planet, it's a little bit more about, well, they're in space, and we don't know how space technology ages. So, he could have been, this could have been over 100 years ago. It could have been longer than that. It could have been less than that. We don't know. But, Flint's treasure was, of course, this concept of Treasure Planet. That's, he would show up and then he would just vanish after doing, taking all of the treasure, and then he would vanish with no way of following him. And that's, he went to Treasure Planet and everything and set up his treasure there and everything, which we find out later, which I'll go into. There's a trick to, of course, getting to the treasure. With Atlantis, it's not necessarily that there's this legendary treasure. Well, there's a little bit. There's the Shepherd's Journal, which I'll go into in a little bit, but there's not quite as much there. And then, of course, we go into where all three of, Luffy, Milo, and Jim are all inspired by an older role model. For Luffy, of course, it's Shanks, and to a degree, Roger. For Milo, it's his grandfather, and for Jim, it actually ends up being Silver, who, not Silver Israeli, he's not in this, but Silver, who is, well, he appears to be the cook that's on the ship that they end up taking. But he's, of course, also, this pirate captain, and we find out later that he's not necessarily a good guy. But there's that comparison there. And then we go into each of them were given something by the role model. Luffy is, of course, given the straw hat by Shanks. Milo has this, it's a colonial explorer type cap that's like, maybe not the best one to have, but at the time frame, that would have been like the specific kind of hat he would have had that would have been given to an adventurer and everything. And then for, he also was given the Shepherd's Journal later on down the line. But then for, in Treasure Planet, Jim is given Morph, that is just little shape-shifting little morphy blob thing by Silver at the end of the movie. So there's that. They each have something that they were given by their mentor, their role model to a degree. And then where Treasure Planet and One Piece have similarities is that there are strange places and strange races, or different types of races that we are introduced to. With One Piece, of course, there's all the different islands and everything like that they go to. There are all these strange islands. Some don't look as strange as others, but others are still very, very strange. And then there's, of course, all the different races and everything like that inhabit the islands. The Snake Necks, the Giants, the Fishmen, the Three-Eyed Tribes, the Longlegs, the... what ones am I missing? The Long Arms. A bunch of that stuff. All these different races and everything like that, and then inhabit all these different islands and such like that we see in One Piece. And in in Treasure Planet, there's all these different planets that we see. We technically really only land on about 3 planets. There's the planet that that Jim and his mom live on, and then there's the spaceport that's like shaped like a giant, crescent moon and everything like that, which I just think is designed amazingly. And then there's, of course, when they go to Treasure Planet itself. So there's different planets that they see in that regard. And then there's lots of different alien species that we see. There's, Morph is an alien species. I think that Silver is actually a type of species, but I don't think different species, but I don't know if we ever get an exact answer on that. There's all these other ones that we see. There's like the weird spider guy. There's a weird guy that's like a weird head on a body that are like 2 separate things. There's the weird like chicken-legged woman, and a whole bunch of other different races that we see. Even like his friend who's the Dr. Delbert Doubler, who is, of course, their family friend. Like, he's there, and he's like a dog type species. The first mate of the ship is a rock man. There's the captain, and she's a cat woman, literally, and her and Delbert are like the same, come from the same species, but like the females look like cats and the males look like dogs and everything like that. So going off the cats and dogs, so there's that comparison there. And the Minks, that's another one that I can throw in there for One Piece for these different races. And the Sky Islands and everything. Atlantis, I mean, yes, you are introduced to the Atlanteans, but they're not really, I wouldn't necessarily call them like a strange race. And yes, Atlantis is like a strange place that they end up, but the Atlanteans being like, they have white hair and they have like darker skin and everything like that. For the most part, they still are human. They just have an extremely long lifespan, which I will get to why they have that. But we have those moments. Then you get into old men who were friends, and one dying before they could see their dream to its end. So for One Piece, obviously this is supposed to be Roger and Whitebeard and everything like that, where Roger and Whitebeard, they were friends, but they were also like rivals and stuff like that. And of course Roger wanted to see, he got to Laugh Tale and he found out the true history and everything. But I think Roger would have liked to have been able to see it through to the end, see where what the world could be like if someone actually fulfills, I don't know, whatever prophecy or whatever story was on Laugh Tale. I think Roger would have liked to have seen that come to fruition. And of course for Whitebeard, it's he's kind of like helping see that dream along and everything like that, because he kind of sees Roger and Luffy a little bit and wants to help that along a little bit when he meets Luffy. and that type of stuff. So there's that. And then in Atlantis, there's Milo's grandfather, Thaddeus Thatch, and then his friend Preston Whitmore, who is this kind of reclusive billionaire, millionaire, whatever. Well, probably would have been just like a millionaire at that point in time, but he's extremely wealthy. And like they're old friends, and Preston was always kind of would always like kind of like not necessarily encourage Thaddeus, but they would have like rivalries to a degree too. And like, he's at one point, I told him, I think it's Preston talks to Milo at the beginning of the movie when he's introduced to him, and he's just like, I bet your grandfather that he would, I bet your grandfather that I'd kiss him full on the mouth if he ever found that book. He found the book. My regret the day that he found it. And then of course they had the kiss and like a picture taken afterwards. So we have that where it's like these two old men that are old friends, and Thaddeus died a couple of years ago in the story. And then for Preston, it's like he wants to help his friend's grandson finish up this journey that his grandfather started. So we have that. Treasure Planet doesn't really have that. There's not really like two old pirates that we see that are friends in that, so there's not really anything there. And then also in Atlantis, there are pompous old, in Atlantis and in One Piece, there are pompous old men who only see things their way. With One Piece, this is, of course, the Elder Stars, the Gorosei. And in Atlantis, these are the museum directors. And I like the fact that there are 5 of them in both cases. I'm looking at that picture going like, oh my god, there's 5 of them, and there's 5 of them. So yeah, we have the old men and everything like that. I mean, like, the reasons for why they act this way are a bit different. Obviously, for One Piece, it is, the Elder Stars want to keep the world going the way that Im Sama wants it to, because they want to keep their power and everything like that. They don't necessarily want the world to find out about what happened in the Void Century for various reasons, because it does not look good on them. But other things along those lines. And then for the directors at the museum, they just think Milo and his grandfather were crazy. They just think that, Thaddeus was crazy for the fact that he believed in Atlantis and, talked about it until until the end of his life. For Milo, they think that Milo's crazy in that regard. And also the only one that can actually get the boilers to work correctly is Milo, and that's the only reason they want him to stay around. Yeah. And then, of course, we also have an ancient language that very few can read. For my hero. Wrong thing. For One Piece, obviously, this is the language of the poneglyphs that very few can read. Robin can read it, and we found out that Sukiyaki, Kazuki can read it. Since he's still alive, he can read it fine. Momo can learn how to read it. Momo and Hiyori can probably be taught how to read it by their grandfather. Now that they've been reunited. But there's, it's like, as far as we're aware, there's not really anybody else that can read it. We know that Saul has information about the Void Century and stuff like that. And I guess there would be the possibility that Vegapunk might be able to read the poneglyphs, but if that was the case, I think he would have told that to Robin already, or pointed that out to her at some point when Shaka was explaining some things. So I don't necessarily think that that's the case. Also, just because the books on just because the books on O'Hara, just because so many of them survived because of Saul and because of the giants, and Vegapunk has read them and everything like that, that does not necessarily mean that those books are the ones that necessarily explain how to read the poneglyphs. It may have been something where the way Robin learned to read the poneglyphs was because of the fact that she, used her powers to, like, spy on the archaeologists and learn that way. And stuff like that, or maybe found some of Clover's personal notes, and maybe those notes did not survive, so Vegapunk was not able to read those. But if Vegapunk could read the poneglyphs, then that would be quite useful in that regard. But you kind of think that if the world government found out that if Vegapunk could read the poneglyphs, they would be a lot more like, oh, we need to get rid of him a lot faster. But that didn't happen. And then, of course, in Atlantis, There's, of course, the Shepherd's Journal that is written in Atlantean and everything like that. And Milo is the only one that can read it, or the only one. Well, actually, he is technically the only one that can read it, because when they get to Atlantis, they find out that the way to read Atlantean, that the knowledge of how to read it, has actually been lost for a long time, because when everything happened during, I think it's Mabelmach, the Great Flood, Armageddon, with that when Atlantis collapsed, a lot of that knowledge was lost, and that probably the only few left that can read it is Kita's father. But he does not want to teach her to read it, because then she will learn other things, and he doesn't want her to read it, but it's also for her own protection. But Milo is, of course, able to read the Atlantean language and everything like that. Now, the Atlantean language is not nearly as complicated to learn as the poneglyph language. Milo is he's mentioning how he can learn how to read it and everything like that. It's you just take a bit of this and a bit of that and a bit of this and a dash of this and throw it in there, and you're at least in the same ballpark. So yeah, there's that. Treasure Planet doesn't really have symbols or hieroglyphs or anything along those lines that you need to learn how to read. But then we are going to get into where they all line up again, where they follow a strange lost map to find the treasure. With One Piece, of course, you have to find the road poneglyphs, and they will lead you to where Laugh-Tale is once you find all 4 of them, and you get the locations that are written on them, and then you can plot the locations down, and then where they all 4 intersect is, of course, where Laugh-Tale is. So there's that, which is pretty self-explanatory in that regard. With Atlantis, it's, of course, obviously you have to follow the map that is in the Shepherd's Journal in order to find where Atlantis is. And we see that through the course of the story. About third of the way through the story into the halfway point is where, Milo's leading them through everything as he's translating stuff and leading them through all of these underground tunnels and everything like that, well, part of it is under the ocean, but then there's just other ones that are just, huge subterranean tunnels that they have to work their way through in order to find their way to Atlantis. So we have that. And then in Treasure Planet, there is the golden orb that Jim ends up getting from Billy Bones, who is just this old codger of a pirate and everything like that dies in the Benbow Inn, and ends up entrusting the orb to Jim, because Jim is nice and he helps him, and he's I at least have to keep this away from the cyborg pirate, and that's why Jim has it. And Jim, who is literally just, Jim is stated to be very, very smart. His mom even states he built his first solar surfer and stuff like that when he was a kid, and he could be, he could do so well if he just applied himself to stuff. But Jim is, of course, is kind of this kid that's stuck in this kind of backwater area, and he doesn't know what he wants to do with his life, and that's part of what happens throughout the course of the movie is he finds a purpose. But Jim just has this orb, and then he just fiddles with it and just starts pushing and spinning and everything like that, and it just lights up, and then it's just okay, the map works. And that's where we see this whole giant holographic map of the solar system and areas beyond their solar system, that then they can find their way, and they how to make their way to Treasure Planet and such. So there's that. So Jim's the only one that can figure out how to open this map. Whereas, I think even Delbert tries to do it and it doesn't work. And, later on we see Silver try to open the map and it doesn't work. And Jim has to be the one to do it, which is why they keep Jim alive. So there's that. And then there's this lost history that is kind of within all of them, with the fact that in One Piece, of course, this is the Void Century, this 100-year time frame or so that was lost to the world because of everything that happened with the world government and the Great Kingdom, or the predecessors to the world government, the 20 kings and the Great Kingdom and everything, where all of that happens. And of course, that was hidden away by the world government, and everything wiped from any history books, and probably various other buster calls that was done in order to stop anybody that did try to learn about it, or anybody that got close to learning about it, like what happened with O'Hara. And then in regards to with Atlantis, the lost history is obviously just like Atlantis itself is the lost history. It's this, the fact that Atlantis was lost to the world, and this all this technology and everything that they had that was lost, the same way that technology from the Great Kingdom was lost. Now, with the Great Kingdom, we can kind of deduce that they're probably most likely all dead. I mean, like, there's a theory, of course, that those that have the will of D are like descendants of the ancient kingdom. Um, and that there might be some other areas where like maybe possible descendants live, but like then again, they can't really come out into the world too much. There's the Lunarians and stuff like that we know that at least King is still around, so there's a possibility other Lunarians may be around, but probably not that many of them. And those ones may have been allies of the Lunarians may have been allies of the Great Kingdom at the time, or may have been part of the Great Kingdom. So there's that concept as well, that those have been still around. And with Atlantis, they are just literally, they cannot leave where they are. I mean, like, they could attempt to like make their way to the surface, but it would have been only a very few of them. And because they don't have the power source that they used to have, or at the very least that power source has been lost, which I'll get to the power source, they don't have the ability to get back to where they need to be. They do not have the ability to get back to the surface to interact with the world again. They barely have, Kita even says, yes, we survive, but we do not thrive. We every year a little more of us is washed away. As in, even though they are extremely long-lived, and yes, they can still have children, and yes, they still have food, they're still slowly losing more and more of their history, because those that do die are the very, very old ones, like her father, who saw a lot of things, but have probably don't have the ability to continue to pass on that knowledge, or they were forbidden to do so by the king, because Kita's father wanted to, and I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce his name, but he was voiced by Leonard Nimoy, so rest in peace, Leonard Nimoy. Not that I didn't already do that when that happened, when I talked about that in that video, but we see some of that. And also with Atlantis, Kita even states it's like she can somewhat figure out how to work things, because they have like this fish ship that she tries to like drive, and it doesn't work very well, that she has to power it by like the crystal she has around her neck, and it doesn't work very well. And Milo ends up like translating. He's like, okay, so you have to do this, this, and this. She's like, yes, I did that. Yes, I did that. I didn't do that. So we get that, and like Milo helps them to restore a lot of their understanding, their knowledge that was lost. And then in regards to the lost history that is part of Treasure Planet, we have Ben, bioengineered navigator, who is this robot that had once served on Flint's crew, that had been, the navigator on the crew and everything. And we find out that, he's been living on this planet, on the, Treasure Planet, for a very long time. And that, Jim and the others that show up are the first visitors that he's had in a long time. Because, he's like, well, yeah, Flint, Flint came here and everything like that. And, like, he knew Flint, but, like, the part of with Ben is that his mind is gone. That, Flint literally ripped out Ben's mind and then kept it with him on his body till he died, because we see it like clutched in his, cold, dead, skeletal hands when they make their way into where the treasure is. And, so there's that. And then Ben, of course, gets his memory restored, kind of the way that with Atlantis, the Atlanteans are going to have, had their kind of slowly are getting their culture restored, because Milo is there and he can help them with that. And then, of course, with One Piece, we hope that that everything will get restored, or at least somewhat help with, spreading of like what the true history is, once they're able to find Laugh Tale. And then, Robin can translate everything. And then, yeah, there's the theory. I know that a YouTuber that I watched, because I watched several other One Piece YouTubers, that they kind of came up with the theory that, like, well, since Vegapunk wants to do, like, the internet thing, that it might be that, Vegapunk may die. All the Vegapunk clones may die throughout the course of Egghead, or shortly after Egghead. And then it'll be Frankie that will carry on that. and actually end up Frankie getting the brain fruit would be kind of interesting, but I don't think that would be something that he would want, because again, Frankie never stated he wants a devil fruit. I think he even stated he doesn't necessarily want one. I mean, he did state that back during Dressrosa when Luffy offered that, well, if I win Ace's devil fruit, I mean, like, I can't eat it, but like, would you take it? And I think Frankie did say yes, because like it would be a request of his captain and such, and it would, help keep Ace's memory alive. Sabo ended up with the fruit, so it's not an issue. But if Frankie is able to actually make like the internet the way that this global communication system and setup that Vegapunk wanted to make, then they would be able to then distribute all of the knowledge about the Void Century and then actually make it so everybody knows about the Void Century. So there's that. And then going from there, I don't have too much more. And then another thing that was very similar between Atlantis and One Piece is the fact that there is this ancient society with highly advanced weaponry. With One Piece, it's the ancient kingdom that had all of this other advanced technology and everything like that we find out that was on, that, Egghead is like this, attempted recreation of it, but they also had the ancient weapons. Now, whether all of the ancient weapons were exclusively created by the ancient kingdom and then like the world government got their hands on some of them is left up for debate, but we know about the ancient weapons. There was, of course, Poseidon that is currently reincarnated inside of Shirahoshi. We know about the Pluton was supposedly a battleship, and then of course Uranus probably had something to do with the sky. Could have been the giant laser thingy that we saw recently. So there's that. With Treasure Planet, there's not really any ancient weapons that we end up seeing. Yeah, there's interesting weaponry that we see in the course of this, in the course of the movie, but it's not necessarily stated to be extremely high tech necessarily in regards to like, oh, this is so much more advanced than anything else. But then of course with Atlantis, they have the giant Leviathan that the ship that the crew and the submersible have to get by in order to get to where they can start making their way to Atlantis. They have to get past the Leviathan, and then of course the Atlanteans have like the fish ships that can actually shoot lasers, and then of course they have the giant stone golems that are used to help defend their kingdom when the lava flow comes, and what protected the kingdom when everything happened back during the time when Atlantis sank. And then of course going into that, we also have like where there is an ancient energy source. With One Piece, it appears to be with the Great Kingdom there was some type of an ancient energy source. Vegapunk, Lilith kind of, was like, well, it could have been something to do with the sun, which is, it kind of leads us into like solar power or solar fission or solar fusion, considering the fact that very, very recently there was news that came out that they had actually managed to achieve solar or, nuclear fusion, which fission is where you split the atom and then gain the power that way. Fusion is where you combine the atoms. And it actually makes a lot more power, and it doesn't have nearly as much chemical waste, radioactive waste that comes with that. That's like, what happens with the fission. So there's that possibility, as I stated, as we were told, there's instances to do with, the Atlantean history had the heart of Atlantis. Again, there's not really like an ancient power source that goes into Treasure Planet. I mean, like, there is the planet itself that has like the treasure as like the center of it, because you have to figure out the trick to get to it. With One Piece, it's of course, you have to follow the rope poneglyphs to get there. With Atlantis, you have to follow the Shepherd's Journal and figure out how to get there, and then you have to like find where the heart of Atlantis is itself within Atlantis. And then with Treasure Planet, you have to figure out that, you have to go through the door that will actually take you into the center of the planet, which you need the orb in order to work. But then with Atlantis, there's the heart of Atlantis, which I talked about this when I talked about like the Vegapunk and some other stuff. I mentioned the heart of Atlantis because it sounded very similar to what Vegapunk was talking about in regards to this ancient source of power. Now, the heart of Atlantis could be used as a weapon, but the way that we see it more utilized throughout the course of the first movie and the second movie for Atlantis is, of course, it's more used as a way to protect. They use it at the end of the first movie Kitty uses the power that's flowing inside of her from combining with the crystal to, um, protect her, protect Atlantis and everything from the volcano erupting. And then when you get to the second Atlantis, Milo's return, there's some other stuff where she uses the same, barrier, shield technology, shield power to, move them up to the surface and everything. Also, the heart of Atlantis, the tiny crystals that all of the Atlanteans wear, those also are somewhat connected to it in the fact that it helps keep them alive. Helps them with the longevity, helps them with healing, because we see Kita heal, use the crystal to heal Milo at one point in the movie. And the thing with One Piece is Shirahoshi is one of the ancient weapons. We know that she can control the Sea Kings. So there's the theory that, all of the ancient weapons may also end up having, there has to be like a human counterpart to it in order to make it work correctly. With Poseidon, with Poseidon, it has to be, the princess of the royal bloodline, and they have to be born with the power, and Shirahoshi was born with it. And then with, there's the thought that with Pluto, it has to be like the person, someone that built it has to be like inside of it or something like that. And then like, depending on stuff, whatever, Uranus is up in the sky, possibly, that it could be something to do with, maybe you have to have because it was like Uranus was connected to, was it Uranus or Pluton? One of the two was connected to Alabasta, in some way because of the poneglyph that was there stated where you can find it. And if it is that, if it's connected to Alabasta, it might be like a member of the Alabasta royal family has to be, the Nefeltari family has to be the one that can control it, or they have to have something to do with that. Which I guess does lead into the fact that it's like, we don't know exactly where Vivi is at the moment. And there may have been the possibility that either you need like that person themselves to control this, and you may be using Vivi for that, or it may be that they needed the blood of them, and like maybe they, dark part here, and I'm sorry, it may have been that they killed Cobra and then they used some of his blood in order to go after the Lucia kingdom. That could have been the possibility there, but that just popped into my head. But yes, because the crystal that's in Atlantis, that is the heart of Atlantis, has to be kind of wielded by a member of the royal family. And I think it stated it has to be like a female of the royal family, which then connects, Kita to the crystal, because like her mother had been in the crystal before to protect Atlantis when it sank, but then also Kita gets pulled into the crystal in order to protect it the second time. Also, between all three of them, there is also a betrayal that happens, because with One Piece, of course, this is, Blackbeard is the obvious one that was the betrayer, and the fact that he betrayed the Whitebeard pirates and, betrayed the world government, and he is just a backstabber in general and everything. So there's that. With Atlantis, there was Rourke that was the one that ended up kind of betraying, everyone and everything. I mean, technically the rest of the crew was like in on what was going on except for Milo. And then, but they all had changes of hearts and like went back to help Milo because it was the right thing to do for the rest of the main crew. And then in Treasure Planet, it's of course Silver is actually, he's actually kind of the bad guy, but then at the end he ends up making the right decision and helping Jim and the others escape and everything like that. So there's, comparisons there as well that I wanted to throw in. So that's what I have for this. I just, things that I wanted to talk about in that regard, and I was like, I have the time to talk about it here around Christmas now, so that's what I wanted to do. So I thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you can think of there's a comparison in there that like I didn't think of, go ahead and comment it. And yes, I'm aware of the fact that I'm not saying that Oda took inspiration from Atlantis and from Treasure Planet and Treasure Island and everything like that. There's the possibility he did, but it could have just been that he ended up coming up with this on his own. Could have been inspired by stuff, which again is not a problem, but it could just be that he has thought of some of this on his own and has worked his way through it that way, and it just happens to be similar, which does happen because there's only so many different types of stories in the world that can be told. You just have to come up with a way to put your own spin on it and your own twist and everything. So that's what I have. I thank you for watching. I hope you have a nice rest of your day and happy holidays. Bye!